My successful revenge for a severely abusive ex. I dated an extremely abusive guy right after my divorce. I was just divorced for 2 months when I met him. He was the polar opposite of my ex, so I thought things would be okay. I was 27 and he was 54. The first 3 months were bliss. Whining, dining, going places and meeting friends. All of a sudden, Mr. Hyde showed up and I found out he was going through his 4th divorce. Then the abuse started. Calling me fat, telling me I dressed like a hoe, had to always pick out what I wore, hated everything I did, and when I follow his suggestions, it still wasn't good enough. Nothing I did was ever good enough. Then the physical abuse started. Grabbing me and shoving me, taking my arm and twisting it until it hurt. He was sadistic. I was like a science experiment to him. He talked about all his exes all the time. He delighted in messing with them, stalking, intimidating. The few times we saw her out, she had the look of concern on her face when she looked at me. I finally had enough of his shit. I was 27-28 and in the best shape of my life, and this old mother effer was ruining me. That's when I decided to be proactive and make it count. I told myself I wasn't going to be another woman he succeeded in screwing over. A few months prior, he had found out his divorce wasn't finalized and he went into her house and emptied it, so his soon-to-be ex-wife came home to an empty house. He had a $1 million car collection he also hid. He trusted me by telling me where all the stuff was hidden. He had to go to court because the judge ordered him to produce all the belongings. He denied knowing where they were. After I had enough of his abuse, 9 months, I went into his work and got her phone number off his computer and called her. She invited me over and I told her where everything was. A week later, she got her attorney to tell the judge, so he obviously granted her possession of everything. I watched from 2 blocks away all the furniture, cars, etc., get hauled off by her. He had to serve 6 months in prison because he was found in contempt of court's orders. His business also went under. It was exhausting for me to do all of this, but totally worth it. TLDR. I teamed up with my ex's last ex-wife and we nailed his ass to the wall. My mother finally got revenge on her abusive ex with his own paperwork. This all started several years ago during my parents' divorce, but the revenge took place this November. Backstory. Growing up, my father was an emotionally abusive piece of crap, who got off of religious authority and controlling every aspect of our lives. We were kept so isolated and made to fear the police/CPS, to the point where we thought it was normal. After I went off to college, my little brother came out as gay and my father started beating him, unbeknownst to my mother and I. When my brother threatened to tell my mom about this, my father kicked the then 15-year-old out of the house. My mother was understandably horrified by this and tried to get my father to see sense, at which point he started hitting her. Long story somewhat short, I got my mom out, my brother went to leave with friends, and divorce proceedings were started. It was nasty, no one wanted to go to the police, father was friends with the local small-town cops, and thankfully my asshat sperm donor agreed to a no-fault divorce. While my mom was cleaning out her stuff from the house under the watchful eye of her amazing coworkers, she found my father's discharge papers. This is where the plan started. You see, my father spent his entire 25-year marriage telling everyone that he was a Special Forces vet who had been awarded a Purple Heart and Bronze Star, which were both coincidentally destroyed in a house fire along with all his uniforms and paperwork. But here were his discharge papers and they clearly stated he was given an other than honorable discharge after 4 years in the motor pool. Not wanting to be seen as the vindictive ex-wife, my mom quietly took the papers and didn't tell anyone for years after my father moved away to a new state to join a religious group. When she finally told me while tipsy this past year, we hatched a plan. Over the next few months, we snooped on social media to make a list of his former and current employers, family, major friends that we knew of, and his new church. She enlisted our extended family and I my college friends from all over the country. In November we each purchased Veterans Day cards and wrote out messages such as, "Stolen Valor," "Motor Pool," "Pretender," etc. Everyone attached a photocopy of the page listing his discharge. And then we sent them on the same day from the nearest major cities with the return address listed as his current church. They arrived on or around Veterans Day from Atlanta, Orlando, Washington, D.C., New York, St. Louis, Kansas City, Seattle, Portland, L.A., Houston, Ontario, London, and Edinburgh. Immediately my mother was inundated with calls/emails from people who had no idea, and couldn't believe he would lie like that, and we're sorry for not believing her/my brother. My dipshit dad sent a nasty email implying horrible things if he ever could prove my mother did this, which she forwarded straight to her lawyer along with the nasty letters from his more vocal supporters. Now most people in our hometown look at her as the battered spouse who walked out with her head held high rather than that tramp who divorced such a godly man. My little brother has no idea we did this. He didn't want anyone to confront my father, but later told me he got a random call from our old pastor apologizing for kicking him out of the church over my father's lies. And I can finally sleep well at night with the knowledge that his reputation is in shambles by our hands. Revenge truly is a dish best served cold. Edit. Thank you for the award. I'm glad my revenge could bring a few smiles. Epic revenge on abusive ex. No one hurts my kids. Hi. New here, so be gentle. This is about how I got away from my abusive ex in a way even she didn't see coming. So we'll call her Cindy. Cindy and I met at college and were in the same class. We hit it off fairly quickly and were soon dating after around 6 months of being friends. Fast forward a couple of years and we were married and had even adopted 2 beautiful boys. Around the time of the adoption finally happening of our second boy, Cindy began to change. At first she would be like, "You're wearing that? Do you want the world to know you're a hoe?" And I would say nothing. But then it would turn into slaps and punches. I won't go into detail. But anyway, eventually she started on my kids. No one hurts my kids, and that's when my plan started to form. I should mention I'm from the UK, and at the time this was happening I was leaving in Sweden, so I couldn't easily get away as I essentially had nowhere to go. She controlled my money by this point. So one day after she finished work I suggested we go on holiday, and all Cindy said was, "Only if I decide where we go. You can't even pick a good movie to watch." Yeah. Her logic didn't make much sense to me either. Now here's where my plan really gets going. Cindy can't use computers. She literally doesn't know how to use them. So I got on the booking site and made it look like I would book 4 tickets to the place she wanted to go. I can't remember where. I think somewhere in America. Once she saw I was ready to book, she left me to do it and went to another room. When she was gone, I quickly changed the location to England and booked 3 tickets. Now you may think that she would know since she controlled my finances. She let me keep around £200 for myself, if I was good. So at this point I had enough saved, but she would still make me show her what I spent the money on. I paid for the tickets and printed them. I said to Cindy that I would look after them. This did annoy her. "Just don't lose them. You know how stupid you are." I just grit my teeth and put them away safely and somehow managed to make it through the following weeks. I should add that my boys at this point know what is going on and also know not to say a word to Cindy. As for sending items back home to the UK, I was going back to my parents and they generally had enough things there for the 3 of us, so we were going to leave everything we currently had on Sweden. The day arrives and we get to the airport fairly early. As usual, Cindy was moaning about the wait time. I had told her that the flight was 6:45 when really it was an hour before. So it was 4:45 and the boys were tired, so we sat down and they fell asleep pretty quickly next to me. Cindy was pacing up and down getting really agitated. "Why did you have to book a flight so damn early?" is all she kept hissing at me. Of course I kept apologizing. After about 30 minutes of her being restless I suggested she go see if the bar was open. I knew the boys and I would need to move soon. Cindy quickly agreed and I told her what gate to meet us at and when. Again, can't remember what the number was. But for this let's say 4 and my gate was 11. So she left. I woke the boys up and we headed for our gate. I'll admit I've never felt so nervous. I was looking over my shoulder the whole time. When we got there after waiting for a while, we went through and got on the plane and a great weight lifted off my shoulders. My boys and I were finally free of this woman who had turned into a monster. I have no idea how she reacted. I don't think she cared honestly. I never heard from her again. She had never been to my parents' house as they didn't approve of her as a person. The three of us are doing great and I've now met a wonderful woman who treats us wonderfully. Revenge is sweet on an abusive ex for something he actually didn't do. TL, Dr. Ex gets away with abuse he commits. Gets in trouble for abuse he didn't. This happened many years ago, but the taste of revenge is still so sweet. My ex-husband Lee was horribly abusive, but we lived in a town where his family had much influence, so my charges were always dismissed. He put me in the hospital more than once, and it was always brushed off. I finally was able to escape, and left him and moved to a town where no one knew him or his family. I felt so free, and wanted no reminders of Lee, and spent money I didn't have on a new coffee table. I bought all the other furniture used. The table was gorgeous and had a full glass top. It was delivered 2 weeks before these events and was a visual reminder of my new life. Lee had been threatening me over the phone that he wanted me to file for divorce because it cost money and I had refused. We shared no children or property, and frankly I was sick of him pushing me around. After 3 months, I get a call from him saying his new girlfriend wanted to get married and he had filed for divorce. He wanted to come to my house for me to sign the papers. I agreed because I did want to be completely free of him, and felt like I had won a small battle by making him pay the filing fee. Lee gets there, and everything was fine for the first few minutes. However, when I started reading the divorce papers, he was trying to get me to pay spousal support. I got to that part and told him that my lawyer would have to look over the agreement before I signed, and he lost his mind. I collected snow globes at the time, and a good friend had given me a huge, beautiful one for Christmas. He grabbed that snow globe that was on my shelf and threw it into my coffee table, shattering it. I lost it. I literally couldn't even see because I was so furious, and I screamed at him that he was going to pay for that. He laughed and told me to prove it, that no one had cared when he smashed in my face, and no one would care about a table. Without even thinking, I balled up my fist and punched myself in the face. The look on his face was priceless and so confused, and then I punched myself again and started screaming for help. I hit myself one more time before he ran out, and by that time my neighbor had run over to my house after hearing my screams. My lips were bloody, my nose was bleeding, and I had blacked one eye. Lee ran from the house and the police were called. I told them he had done it, and the broken table was a perfect backdrop to the violence. They caught him before he got out of town. He was arrested for assault, and since he was on probation he would go back to jail if convicted to serve that sentence on top of the new one. I did end up dropping the charges but let it hang until I got everything in the divorce that I wanted. It took about 6 months of him thinking he was going to prison. Revenge for an abusive ex. I won't go into the nitty-gritty details, but here is my revenge story. So I was in a relationship for about 2/3 years with a drop-dead gorgeous girl, amazing 11/10. Anyway, after some time together I opened up about my life, as did she. Little to my knowledge, she would later use this against me. Now she wasn't horrible to start off with but gradually made things worse and worse. It started off with a few errands or something, which was fine. I was her boyfriend so I didn't mind doing them at first. But they soon grew to things like, "Do my college essay for me. I'm tired." Or, "I need a new phone, can't you buy me one?" Now most people would think I was stupid for doing all of these things, but as the title explained, it was abusive. If I didn't do something she requested, she would belittle me and use everything I opened up to her against me. I felt scared to ask for help and just had to do what she said. Fast forward a few years and we've broken up. She found someone with more money and decided to swap. I was getting on with life and just trying to recover from years of torment. But I wanted her to feel what I felt. Petty, maybe, but I have had enough at this point. So a few months go by and I don't see her or hear of her. Until one day, as I'm walking home, I see her walking in my direction. She stops and speaks to me, and then tells me about how the other guy didn't do anything I used to do. I guess he was smart enough to get out of there. She started getting sad and desperate, wanting me back so she could get all her stuff. She said things like, "You'll have to get back with me or you will never get better," and so on. But this is where my plan started to form. I said I'd get back with her and do all this stuff, and of course she was over the moon. I knew this time I would get her back for it all. So I started doing things she said. She asked me to do another essay, this time for some really crucial parts of her coursework. When I was doing it, she said that if it wasn't an A, then she'd make my life hell. Well, I made sure it was an A. An absolute pile of crap. She gladly took it off my hands, didn't even check over it, and handed it in. A few days later, I get a phone call and she is livid. Trying to pull up as many things to make me upset as she could. I sat there grinning like a madman. I knew no matter what she said, I finally made her pay for what she did. Last time I checked, she failed college and doesn't have a hopeful future. So maybe I was extreme for ruining her life, but I have permanent mental health issues that she caused. I think that's a fair trade-off. My ex and I were dating and I was such a schmuck. I drove her everywhere. Paid for every meal. Did everything for her. She was such a user. Anyway, come to find out she's screwing this guy from the soccer team. But, how, you ask? So I'm sitting in study area and this black student comes running up to me. He says, "We need to talk, in private." And so I oblige. His friend shows up too and I'm starting to get confused. He says, "Do you know my ex's name?" And I said yeah. And he says, "Have you been dating her?" And I say yeah. And he says, "I am so sorry and embarrassed to tell you this, but we had been hooking up for months." He goes on and on about how he's really sorry and this isn't reflective of his personality and he couldn't allow her to two-time me. Well, I get to my room and do the math and everything he said made sense. Lies she told me suddenly became clear and I realized this guy had just saved me. So, I confront her and she denies it. Then she cries and says she loves me. I stayed with her for another little while but ended it. Best revenge? She began dating this douchebag and moved thousands of miles to be with him. He was cheating on her the entire time. She posts a snarky message on FB, and then calls me saying I was the only one she ever loved and missed me and wanted to fly back and come leave with me. I hung up.